Good morning, everyone. So my name is Lexian McBain. I'm from St. George's University, a teaching fellow, and today I'll be doing a presentation on the review of the pathology of and congenital anomalies of the Coracoid process and its clinical application. It was a project that I worked on last year and got published as well. So the overview for the presentation, I'm going to be talking about the anatomy of the Coracoid process, function of the Coracoid process, congenital deformities, and Coracoid pathology. So this is just a picture. So this is just a picture of the shoulder itself. So here you have the scapula. Anterior to the scapular structure, you have your coracoid. Here you have your clavicle, and you can see the humerus and the relation it is to the coracoid process. Because of its location, you would see that the function of the coracoid itself, the coracoid process, have a different attachment that later on we'll see would relate to stabilizing the shoulder joints. So just a little bit about the coracoid process. So from this picture, we can see that it is an anterior projecting structure. If you look at the root of the process itself, you'd see it goes a little bit more anterior than it does upwards. The body is facing downwards, but also pointing anterior as well, and the tip of the process is more or less pointing downwards. So the axis of the coracoid is described as curved. The process also articulates with the humerus, which we see, which is lateral to it, and the clavicle, which is superior to the structure. You can actually palpate it in the deltopectoral groove between the deltoid and the pectoralis major muscle. And if you're wondering what that is, that would be inferior to the clavicle. If you follow that pectoralis muscle right here, and you really have to go deep, like we tell our anatomy students. So the function of the coracoid process, like I mentioned before, is stabilization of the joint. So you have several other structures that is attached to the process. You have the short head of the biceps brachii, the coracobrachialis tendon, the pectoralis minor tendon, and the coracoclavicular ligaments. So this is a great picture to just show you the different attachments. So if you look here, here is a coracoid process, and attaching to it, you can see your pectoralis muscle, major right here, the group right here. You have the short head of the bicep right here, and the coracobrachialis tendon. Right, so this is another picture. This is also a great view of the coracoid process in the center, as well as the attachments around it. So the types of congenital defects that was mentioned in the paper is your coracoclavicular joint. You can also have duplication of the clavicle and triplication of the coracoid process. You can have a double acromion and coracoid process. You can have Sprengel's deformity, which is more or less related to the deformity of the scapula. But since the coracoid is attached to the structure, you also see a variation in the coracoid as well. And a coracoid sternal bone. So the coracoclavicular joint. So I talked about the coracoclavicular ligament, which connects the coracoid process to the clavicle. In some cases, you can actually have a coracoclavicular joint, which is an articulation between the clavicle and the coracoid process. It's not normal variant. And when you do have that, you have narrowing of the space between the clavicle and the coracoid process. And you can have compression of certain structures that are in between there. The symptoms that is experienced is very similar to your supracoracoid impingement syndrome. And this syndrome is actually compression of your long head of the biceps, as well as the glenohumeral ligament. So you tend to have pain in the arm as well. So the symptoms are very similar to that, and you can differentiate by radiography between the two. You can treat this by simply excision of the joint to enlarge the space, so that you won't have that compression on the ligaments present in that area. Another defect that we do have is duplication of the clavicle with triplication of the coracoid process. So this is not a very popular defect. It only have been seen in 8 reported cases that I found in the literature, and only 2 of those cases were further examined. So in the 2 cases that was closely looked at, we found that the extra clavicle was actually inferior to the original clavicle, and it was fused at the lateral end just before it connects to the acromion. And we find that there is trifurcation of the coracoid process. There was no surgical intervention that was needed. This patient didn't present with any pain whatsoever. So in your double acromion and Coracoid process, like it says, you have double acromion, a bifurcation of the acromion and the Coracoid process. With these patients, however, they lack normal rounded contour, and that led to the further investigation of their symptoms or their presentation. So what you see here is the shoulder itself can only be abducted to 125 degrees. Flexion is only to 90 degrees. Extension 60 degrees. Internal rotation 90 degrees. And external rotation 55 degrees. And there was no embryological cause that could be detected for these syndromes. Then you have Sprengel's deformity. So it's actually a congenital deformity of the shoulder girdle itself. So in this patient, you have one scapula presented more elevated than the other scapula. And since the coracoid process is attached to this, you tend to see a variation in the presentation of the coracoid bone, or the coracoid process. There's one interesting finding that they found in this patient is a coracosternal bone with a connection from the coracoid process to the sternal bone. And it's only been seen in patients with Sprengel's deformity. So the measurement of the coracoid process was also relevant for our research. The mean maximal harvestable coracoid length was found to be 19 millimeter, and the inferior coracoid pillar was found to be 31.1 times 16.6 times 9.9 millimeter, while the superior coracoid pillar was 41.7 times 14.2 times 8.4 millimeter medially and 6.6 millimeter laterally. So why measure the coracoid process? So we found that measuring the coracoid process helped in the diagnosis of some coracoid pathologies. So it helped to diagnose your subcoracoid impingement, which is actually just impingement of your subscapularis tendon between the coracoid and the lesser tubercle of the humerus itself. And some surgeons, it has been shown helpful when it comes to realigning the coracoid after a coracoid fracture, as well as coracoid impingement syndrome, which I just spoke about. Rotator cuff has been associated with a decrease in the coracoid body as well as to the glenoid surface, as well as the coracoid tip to the glenoid surface and the coracoid body to the coracoid tip angles. So because of that known association, knowing the length of the coracoid process can help with fixing those diagnoses or repairing rotator cuff fracture tear. And so this concludes the presentation. This is the references. And thank you for your attention. So this is really interesting. This is your acromion joint. This is your clavicle. And here you can see a bifid acromion. Okay, they don't have a picture of a bifid coracoid, but bifid acromion. Thank you.